Hi, I'm Rob, and today I want to show you this Retevis MB1 CB radio that they sent me to review and share with you, along with the matching MB500 mag mount antenna. Here's a look at everything that comes in the boxes. First up, we have a bag of hardware. There's some thumb screws in here and a mic holder and some various screws. We also have a mounting bracket, the owner's manual, and of course the radio itself. And this thing is pretty small. It measures about 4 3/4 inches wide by about 4 inches deep at its widest point, including the knob, and it's about 1.5 inches thick. The radio, of course, also comes with a microphone, and this one uses the RJ45 computer network style plug. So the antenna comes with an Allen wrench for adjusting and a spare set screw. You get the magnet mount base, and this has an SO239 style antenna mount, and it's got felt on the magnet side of the antenna. And this is about 13 feet or so of RG58U coax. The antenna whip is supplied as 2 pieces. This is the end of the antenna that mounts onto the magnet base. You can see this is the PL259 style mount, and then presumably there's a loading coil in this base. The upper part of the antenna contains its own loading coil here, which ends up being in the center of the antenna once it's assembled onto the lower part of the whip. While we're here, I'm going to use the supplied Allen wrench and tighten up this set screw to keep both halves together. So now let's take a closer look at the radio. Starting with the left, we have the RJ45 mic connector. Now some people don't like these, but I actually do. They're smaller than the traditional round style microphone connector, and you can actually replace these, I feel, easier than you can the soldered on round ones if you've got the right crimp tool. To the left of the LCD screen, we've got 3 buttons: squelch, AM and FM, and the emergency button. The LCD screen here in the middle shows us the channel control. There is a signal meter. There is a frequency readout down here, but this is not an actual frequency counter. It's just sort of another way to display the channel. You'll see later when we look at the menu that other information will show up down here for the menu items. Speaking of the menu, this is how we would access it using the F button, and then the up-down arrows are what we use to change channels on this radio. Over here on the right is the on-off switch and the volume control. If we look at the main body of the radio, it's actually made from die-cast aluminum. Presumably that doubles as sort of a heat sink. The bottom cover of the radio actually feels like it's plastic, and of course it has slots in it for the speaker. On each side of the radio there are threaded holes to accept the thumb screws that hold on the mobile mounting bracket. On the back of the radio we've got the SO239 for the antenna connector, we've got an audio jack for an external speaker, and we have got a hardwired power cord with a 12-volt accessory plug on the end. Before we dig in and start trying out this radio, I think I'll get the FCC mandated screen peel out of the way. So let's go through some of the controls on this radio. The first one I'll talk about is the squelch. We have a manual squelch mode and an auto squelch mode. Right now the squelch is off, and you can hear all the background noise coming through. If I want to just turn on traditional squelch, I short press the button, and then I use the arrows to set the level. You can see that indicated down here in the lower right, until I get to the level where the squelch squelches out the background noise. And then once it's set, it works like a traditional squelch, where if something stronger like that comes through, the squelch opens up and we can hear it. Now this radio also has auto squelch, and to activate that, I can just push and hold the squelch button. You can see an AQ shows up here on the screen, and we can set the level of the auto squelch the same way we did the traditional squelch by using the arrow keys from 1 to 9, 9 being the highest. Once I've got that set where I want, I'll just short push the button and we are good to go with auto squelch. The next button on the left, labeled A/F, toggles between AM mode, as you can see up here in the screen. Once I push it, you can see now we're in FM mode. Long pressing the button actually locks the radio. You can see there's a lock icon there. And now pushing any of these buttons has no effect on the radio. The only thing that works is the volume and turning it off. And of course, if I want to unlock it, I just long press that button again. The EMG button lets us toggle between emergency channel 1, which in this case is set to 9, and emergency channel 2, which is set to 19. And then another press brings us back to normal mode. And this button has no long press function. So as we've already seen, the up-down arrows are how we change channels and also how we navigate through menu items, and we'll see that in a minute. Now if I press this button in and hold it for less than a couple of seconds, you'll see that I can just rapidly cycle through the channels. If I push and hold it, the radio will go into scan mode. Now if I let go, you can see the radio is scanning, and scan is lit up down here. Once it hears a signal that breaks the squelch, it'll stop, and then if it doesn't hear anything for a little while, it'll resume scanning. Now if I want to get out of scan mode, I just do a quick press on the mic button, and the radio goes back into normal mode. To access the radio's deeper features, we need to go into the menu system. In order to do that, I'm going to press and hold the F key. Now we can cycle through all the menu options by using the up and down keys. The first menu option that we come to is the tone setting. If I want to change that, I'm going to short press the F key, and now you should be able to see that the setting is blinking down here in the lower corner. If I want to change that, I'll just use the up and down arrows again. The available options here are CT CSS tone and digital squelch tone. So if I select CT for CT CSS tone, I can then push the F key again, and I can choose the tone number that I want to set. Each of the numbers down here correlates to a CT CSS tone. There's a lookup table in the manual. If you don't happen to have your paper copy handy, I'll leave a link to the electronic version down below. Now in this case, I'm just going to select 3. I'll short press the F key again to write that to memory, and then I can move on to the next setting. But in this case, I'm actually going to leave the CT CSS tone off, so I'm going to enter that again, and I'm going to select off, and then I'll short press that to write it to memory. The next option turns the key beep on and off, and we've been listening to that for this whole video, so now I'm going to turn that off. The next option sets the mic level or mic gain. Right now it's at the max of 9, but you can set that down as low as 1 if you want to. The next menu option selects the microphone type. By default, it is set to EL, or electret condenser, which is what the stock mic happens to be. But you can go in and change that to dynamic if you happen to want to use a dynamic microphone with this radio. I'm going to leave mine on EL, and we'll move to the next option, which sets the Vox level. Just like other menu options, we can use the up and down arrows to set that level. The next menu option lets us set the level for the traditional squelch. Right now that's off, but we can set that at as high as 34. I'm going to leave it off for now. The next menu option is the automatic squelch threshold. And right now you can see that that's set to 2. And just as before, we can change that level, although our settings are from between 9 and 1. The next menu option lets us change the scan type. We can choose between squelch or time mode. Next, we have a high cut filter for the receiver. You can see by default that's off, but we can turn that on to filter out some of those high notes from the audio if we want to. The next menu option lets us turn the talkback on and off. Next, we can turn the noise blanker on and off. I'm going to turn mine on. The next menu option is traditional RF gain, and by default that's off, meaning that the receiver is at its max sensitivity, and it looks like the max setting for that is 48. Next we can turn on a Roger beep if we want to use that. By default it's off, but there are 6 variants that you can choose from. Next we can change the display color. For the purposes of the video, I've left mine at white, since that seems to show up best in the camera, but here's a look at all the available colors. There's red, Hartford Whalers green, we've got blue, we've got cyan, we've got yellow, purple, and back to white. With this option, we can change the brightness of the display. It looks like the max is 6 and the minimum is 1. The next menu option is something that you'd normally find on a ham radio, but this is a timeout timer. You can set this in the number of minutes that you want, and it will alert you if you've been keyed up longer than that. The next menu option lets us change the emergency channel 1. Right now by default that's set to 9, but you can set that to whatever you want. And then the next menu option, of course, is for emergency channel 2, which is set to 19 by default. The last menu item lets us do a factory reset and get this all back to the default settings. I'm not going to do that since I'm happy with what I've chosen. Next, let's do a quick power output test. I've got my MFJ meter hooked up to the radio, and I've also got a 50 ohm dummy load connected up to the meter. First, we'll test out AM. If I key up, you can see we're getting a 4.5 watt dead key. And now I'll talk directly into the microphone, and you can see that the needle is not moving at all with modulation, although we are getting a faint flicker on the S meter on the radio screen. I've switched over to FM, and you can see we're getting the same 4.5 watt power. Now, of course, when I talk directly into the microphone on FM, the power level is not going to change, and in this case, there's no flickering on the S meter on the radio either. Next, let's check the antenna out in its native environment. In this case, a 2007 Chevy Suburban. As a first test, we'll check out the magnet strength. I'm just going to flick this thing back and forth to simulate kind of wind load driving on the highway. And you can see the antenna rocks back and forth a little bit, as you would expect, but the magnet is holding strong on the metal. Now what I think I'll do is move the antenna up to the roof, put it in the center, and then I'll set up an SWR meter and we'll check out how well it's tuned. Because the SWR is better on channel 40 than it is on channel 1, that tells me that the antenna needs to be lengthened just a little bit. I've used the supplied Allen wrench to loosen the 2 set screws at the base of the antenna, and I found that the whip was all the way down at the bottom of its travel. So I'm going to slide it up just a little bit and then tighten up these set screws, put this back up on the roof and see if that helps with the SWR. So now it looks like on channel 1 we're about at 2.5, and if we check channel 40, we're now sitting at about 1.5 or so. So it looks like that's the best I can do with the antenna. There's no more travel on the antenna whip to lengthen it at all. So I guess we're just going to have to live with that and see how it works as is. What I want to do now is set up a little bit of a range test for you. I'm going to take my Retevis MB1 and I'm going to set it up on the base station, connect it up to my Mako V58. And then what I'm going to do is take the mag mount antenna and the MB1, and I'm going to put these in my Chevy Suburban. I'm going to mount this right in the center of the roof, and I'm going to drive down the road 5 miles. It's pretty much straight to the next town. At every mile increment, I'll call out and let you hear what it sounds like on the radio that's connected up in the station here.
This is the Retevis MB1 at close range. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Retevis MB1 close range. Retevis MB1 1 mile range test. Retevis MB1 2 mile range test. Retevis MB1 3 mile range test. Retevis MB1 4 mile range test. Retevis MB1 5 mile range test. Retevis MB1 close range test. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Retevis MB1 close range test. Retevis MB1 1 mile range test. Retevis MB1 2 mile range test. Retevis MB1 3 mile range test. Retevis MB1 4 mile range test. Retevis MB1 5 mile range test.
There isn't much activity on the CB band today, but so you can hear what the receive sounds like, I'm actually going to reverse this range test, and I'm going to take the MB2, and I'm going to put that in the Suburban. I'm going to leave the MB1 on the bench in the station here, and I'm going to drive down that same 5 mile road. I'll use the mag mount antenna again, and I'll call out every mile so that you can kind of hear what received signals sound like on the MB1.
Let's do a quick receive test of the Retevis MB1 at close range. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Retevis MB1 close range receive test. Retevis MB1 1 mile receive test. Retevis MB1 2 mile receive test. Retevis MB1 3 mile receive test. Retevis MB1 receive test 4 miles. Retevis MB1 receive test 5 miles out. Retevis MB1 6 miles out receive test.
Now overall, I'm pretty happy with this package. The one thing that I don't like about the antenna is that I couldn't adjust it for the best SWR. I really wanted to kind of lengthen it out a little bit more, and I just couldn't do it the way that it is. I know there's other tricks that you can do, but I'd like to see more adjustment in the antenna itself right from the box without needing any modification. Now, I didn't show it in this video, but I did do a comparison of this antenna against a 4-foot Fire Stick antenna that I also have mounted on my Chevy Suburban, and in the range test I noticed almost no difference between the two antennas. So I think this antenna will work well, especially for a casual operator that doesn't want to have an antenna permanently mounted to their car. You can put this on your car when you need it and take it off when you don't. Now, I don't have much to complain about with the radio itself. I think it's fairly well constructed, and I like the way it's laid out. About the only gripe I have with the radio is the fact that it doesn't have a dedicated squelch control. I think that's something that every radio should have. But having said that, the auto squelch in this radio actually works pretty well. So over time, I may find that I don't really miss that squelch knob as much as I think that I do right now. The only other thing that I think could maybe be improved a little bit is the microphone. Through the tests in the video, I think you saw that the audio quality on it is pretty good, and it actually feels pretty well weighted and comfortable in my hands, but I just kind of find it weird that there's only a tiny little audio hole down here, and all this stuff up here that looks like a traditional mic grill is just for decoration. I'd almost like to see this smaller and do without all that extra cladding up top. But having said all that, I think this radio packs a lot of features into the package. The fact that it's nice and small means that you can mount it in a small car or even in a bigger car that doesn't have a good spot to mount a traditional sized CB radio. I think this radio has all the features that most people would expect or want from a modern CB radio without all the extra bells and whistles that you might not use unless you're a hardcore CB enthusiast. As I said before, there will be an affiliate link in the description if you want to learn more about the radio. I hope you enjoyed my video. Thanks for watching.